You're listening to the Business Wealth Impact Podcast, your source for empowering information and cutting-edge ideas from the world's top minds. I'm your host, Jeanne Amlour, founder of seven-figure coaching company, Jeanne Amlour International. Join me on a journey to unleash your potential and create your highest success. Welcome to Business Wealth Impact. Hello, and welcome to another Business Wealth Impact show. Today we have Ellen Langer, was the author of more than 200 research articles and 13 books, including the international bestseller, Mindfulness, The Power of Mindful Learning, On Becoming an Artist and Counterclockwise, Mindful Health, and A Power of Possibility, The Art of Noticing, and most recently, The Mindful Body, Thinking Our Way to Chronic Health. Among other numerous awards and honors, she's the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, 3 Distinguished Scientist Awards, the Stats Award for Unifying Psychology, and the Liberty Science Genius Award. She's widely known as the mother of mindfulness and the mother of positive psychology. She's a member of the psychology department at Harvard University and a gallery exhibiting painter. She lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Welcome, Ellen.
Thank you.
So let's dig into this. I love positive psychology and all that mindfulness stuff. Why don't you first explain to people that aren't really, well-versed in this, what is positive psychology and mindfulness? And let's just sort of talk about what is that.
Yeah, let's just talk about mindfulness as starters. When people hear the word, they often think of meditation. And meditation is fine, but it's very different from what we've been researching for maybe 45 years, right? Meditation is a practice. Mindfulness, as I study it, is immediate, and it's basically a way of life. Now, essentially, there are 2 ways to become mindful. One is recognizing you don't know. Now, people think they know, but since everything is changing, everything looks different from different perspectives. In fact, uncertainty is the rule, not the exception. And I often start these things, Jean, by asking people, how much is 1 plus 1? Because this is the thing that everybody thinks they know. So how much is 1 plus 1?
Well, I would say in some fields 2, but I think you're going to prove me wrong.
Okay, that's right. Smart woman. All right. So 1 plus 1 is 2 if you're using a base 10 number system. If you're using a base 2 number system, 1 plus 1 is written as 10. But easier to understand than that. If you were to take 1 pile of laundry and add it to 1 pile of laundry, 1 plus 1 is 1. You add 1 cloud plus 1 cloud, 1 plus 1 is 1. You add 1 wad of chewing gum plus 1 wad of chewing gum, 1 plus 1 is 1. So in the real world, 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 2. As or more often as it does. Now, what's the importance of this? If somebody comes over to you, unlikely, but still, and says to you, now, how much is 1 plus 1? You're not going to mindlessly answer 2. All of a sudden, you have choices available to you. And you look at the context and then decide whether you want to say 1, 2, 10, or perhaps something else. Right? Most of us are mindless. Well, virtually all of us are mindless almost all the time. We're not there. We're not there to know that we're not there. But 45 years of research has made me quite confident of this. We think we know. So the easiest way to be mindful, but easiest to say, maybe hardest to do, because we're so sure of so many things, is accept that we don't know, then everything is new. The other way is a bottom up, which is take the things you know and just notice new things about them. And as you notice new things about the thing you thought you knew, you say, wow, I didn't notice as well as I thought I did. And your attention naturally goes to it. Right. So it's the very simple process of active noticing. And as you're actively noticing, the neurons are firing. And all of this research has shown that it's literally and figuratively enlivening. So it's easy, and there is nothing in the world that could be better for us. Jan, I was at this horse event many years ago because I was a straight A student, so I knew lots of things, right? I had gotten the right answer on almost every question ever asked in school, right? I'm at this horse event, and this man said, will you watch my horse for me? I'm going to get him a hot dog. Well, it was all I could do but laugh, right? I knew horses are herbivorous. They don't eat meat. He came back with the hot dog, and the horse ate it. And that's when I realized everything I thought I knew could be wrong. For me, that was exciting because that opened up all sorts of possibilities. And because all the things that people say can't be, I say, well, how do we know that? So it's very exciting, but and so easy. That 45
Mm.
years, as you can imagine, is a long time to do research. So we have so many measures. We make people more mindful in this active noticing way. They live longer, their memory improves, their relationships, their competence, and they're more charismatic, better leaders. I mean, across the board. And all you need to do is know you don't know. People know they don't
Mm.
know, but they worry that they don't know because they think they're supposed to know. And so then they
Mhm.
pretend or they genuflect to the CEO or the person who is acting as if they know. They don't know either. So rather than make a
Mhm.
personal attribution for not knowing, which is, I don't know, but maybe you know, so I'll fake it, you have to make a universal
Mhm.
attribution. I don't know, you don't know, nobody knows. And then the
Mm.
posture that you want to achieve for success, I believe, is to be confident but uncertain.
Confident. Okay. I love all of this. Now, the one thing that I love is everything is new. So that to me, if everything is new, imagine the wonder that life would open up if
Exactly.
everything is new because we're not sure of anything.
Exactly. And so, so that
Yeah.
when I say you don't have to practice, it's not a practice as with meditation. If you were going to come
Mhm.
visit me now, you've never been here before, you'd walk in the house, you wouldn't have to practice anything. You'd notice, you'd say, gee, did she do those paint? What is this?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it would be exciting. And that's why we take trips.
Mhm.
We want to see new things, not realizing everything at home is also brand new.
Mm. Well, it's interesting because I noticed I used to live on 14th Street in Greenwich Village in New York. And what I noticed was after living there for a long time and walking up that street back and forth,
Hmm.
I noticed shops that I'd never turned my
Yeah.
head to
Yeah.
look at. I thought, when did that? And they were like, that's been there for years. I said, I
Exactly.
walked past
Exactly.
because you don't notice because
Yeah.
you're tunnel visioned.
Now, everybody has some experience of this. I mean, and I used to
Yeah.
live in the village too, so we'll talk about that later.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
yeah, you're driving on the highway, and let's say you want to get off at exit 24, and all of a sudden you see you're at exit 28. Where were you? you know?
Exactly. Where were you? It's a mind blip, right?
Yeah,
So basically, did you call that paper The Horse and the Hot Dog with that discovery?
no, I could have though. That would have
You could have
garnered a
the
lot
horse
of.
and the hot dog. Let's just examine that. Okay, so basically, the practice is basically so
It's
simple.
not a practice. Once you know, you don't have to practice.
It's just a habit.
I don't like the word habit either because most of the time
Oh.
people do things over and over and over again with the intention of making it second nature so you don't have to think about it. And that means
Mm,
doing it mindlessly. So, what it
mm,
is just an understanding that you don't know. And when you know you don't know, then you tune in. Now, lots of people give what is sweet but meaningless advice. They say, be in the moment. You
mhm,
can't tell yourself to be in the moment because when you're not there, again, you don't know that you're not there. This is the way to
mhm,
be in the moment, which is to recognize it's brand new.
mhm. Okay, so it is basically to try to remember, try to remember the prompt of noticing. And we won't do that automatically. We do have to remind ourselves, but then not get in a rut of calling it a habit because then it's mindless. I understand that. So it's really about keeping it fresh.
Okay, so virtually all of the negativity people experience is a result of their mindlessness.
Mm,
And so one can become more mindful, as soon as you're not feeling good, to start opening things up and looking at it more mindfully. Stress, for example, which I think is the biggest killer out there. Stress is not a function of events.
mm,
Stress is a function of the view we take of events.
mhm,
Now, if you open it up and realize the situation can be understood in multiple ways, the stress dissipates. One of the one liners that I share with people, which is kind of fun, is next time you're stressed, ask yourself, is it a tragedy or an inconvenience? It's almost
mhm,
never a tragedy. I
mm,
hit the car, I forgot the meeting, whatever. And then you breathe. Almost all of the things we're stressed about never happen.
mhm,
So if you review the last few times you were stressed, did those things happen? No. And if they did, well, if you're here to talk about it, then clearly you found a way to get through it.
without dying.
Behind all of that is an understanding that events themselves are not good or bad. Events are nothing, they're just events.
Mhm,
The way we frame it determines the way we'll respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So that means that, so let's say, for argument's sake, right now we're using the internet, that my internet went out.
Mm-hmm.
So what? I would go have lunch,
Mm.
you know, right?
Right.
There'd be no tragedy.
Right.
So once we know that events are only what we make of them, then there's no need to do what people do now. They race from the bad things, they go as fast as they can to the good. You can just be still
Mm-hmm.
and just be in some sense.
Right.
The good thing about all of this is that not only is it easy once we understand it, but it's good for us. It's the way you feel when you're having your most fun.
Mm-hmm.
When you're laughing, you don't laugh when you know the punchline,
Mm-hmm.
typically,
Mm.
right? That means it's new, it's mindful. When you're engaged in something, and people often wait to be engaged, all they need to do is actively notice.
Mm.
We did a study a while ago. We took women who hate football,
Mm-hmm.
and lots of haters, people who hate classical music and whatever.
Mm.
And all we did was have one group do the activity, watch the football game. Another group noticed one new thing about the football game. Another 3 new things, another 6 new things. And the more they noticed, the more they liked what they were noticing. So this active noticing is the essence of engagement. Now, when you're actively noticing, the neurons are firing, and it's, again, literally and figuratively
Mm.
enlivening. So this means we don't have to wait for the world to excite us. We can become excited about virtually
Mm.
anything. And so boredom becomes something foreign to the person
And
who's mindful.
boredom, nobody wants to be bored. That's not a happy life.
Right, exactly.
Right. Okay. So it's this simple. And it's not just about being right about stuff. It's about more than that. It's about actually seeing stuff.
Yeah, but you can't be right because right depends on the context. So if we go back to my first question, how much is 1 + 1? Well, what does it mean to be right? That if I'm
Mm.
looking for, so if you were a student in class and I say to you, how much is 1 + 1? And you answer 1, chances are, because most people are mindless, I'm going to reprimand you, make you feel stupid, rather than
Mm-hmm.
when you're mindful and you're teaching, you ask the
Mm-hmm.
student, the child, how did you come to that? And then you'd say you added 1 wad
Mm-hmm.
of chewing gum plus 1 wad of chewing gum and came to 1 wad of chewing gum.
Right.
So, right
Right.
depends on context. Noticing context depends on our being mindful. When we're mindless, we're
Mm.
trapped in a single context and oblivious to that.
Mm. Kind of like people talking about politics.
Yes. Yeah.
I always say, I don't know what's going on. Are you sure you do? Because we
Yeah.
know we don't know what's going on. And I find it quite amusing when people from both sides are, this is what's happening. I'm like, well, I don't know that. How do you know that? We don't know
Yeah.
anything about what's going
Yeah.
on in the world as far as I'm concerned, unless we've seen it with our own eyes. And even then it might be fake. So that's kind of where I
Yeah.
stand.
Well, I'll tell you something interesting. So there was a study colleagues of mine did with a basketball game. People are watching basketball, and in the middle of the basketball game, somebody dressed in a gorilla suit comes on the court.
Mm-hmm.
They don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say,
Mm-hmm.
seeing is believing, no, not even that. Your expectations
Mm-hmm.
determine what you see. So what you want is not to have strong expectations, because then you're only going to see what you're expecting to see. You want to sort of
Mm.
have a looser sense of everything around you. So it doesn't mean you don't
Yes,
know anything. You just don't know anything with great certainty. And that makes
for
everything
sure.
potentially interesting. Exactly.
Yes, actually, I watched that gorilla thing and I did not see the gorilla the first time
Yeah.
because they said, watch the team. And my brain was like, watch that. So you are watching and you don't see stuff. And it was shocking
Yeah.
to me when I watched it the second time. And I thought, how could I have not seen the gorilla?
Well, we did a study where we took people and we said, we're going to show you a basketball game. Now, all basketball games are just like every other basketball game, which is why we call them basketball games. But just as
Hmm.
certainly, each game is different from each other. What we want you to do is watch this, notice the ways it's the same, and notice the ways it's different. And when you
Mm.
do that, people all notice.
Mm. There you go. Okay. So now about the positive psychology. A lot of people are doing these positive psychology courses, especially people I know, because coaches tend to do that more than the average person.
Mhm.
So what is positive psychology and why are you the mother of this?
Okay. Well, way back, gosh, I guess the first study I did was in the early 70s. This was a time when everybody was studying problems,
Mm,
helplessness, conformity, whatever. And when we did, Judy Roden and I did the nursing home study where we gave elderly people in nursing homes choices to make. That turned out to be a mindful manipulation, which we didn't realize at the time, and they lived longer.
mm,
So very different. Rather than starting with problems and make them better, we were just going to get better than better. It was a
mhm,
different focus. So prior to positive psychology, much of the focus was on negative things.
mhm,
And but people misunderstand when they think positive psychology, they think that we're telling everybody be positive. And no, I
mm,
mean, positive, negative, these are in our heads. They're not in events. The other day I did a podcast and I was shocked. The person asked me, said she had had a guest on before who talked about toxic positivity. So, oh God, what does that mean? I mean, it sounds like a person who's really struggling and feeling awful in this world.
mhm,
But the point is, events are nothing until we interpret
mm,
them. And the more
mm,
mindful, the more interpretations we have available. And just think about it, John. If you see a situation, you can interpret it as positive or as negative or neutral.
mhm,
One of those three
mhm,
makes you feel good, one makes you feel awful, and the other doesn't make you
mhm.
feel anything. You're going to
Right.
gravitate towards the one that makes you feel good.
Yeah, I love that because I say the same thing that things are actually neutral till we give them meaning.
Exactly,
Now,
exactly.
people can certainly agree with the certain things that's pretty bad. Like universally, we could say, well, COVID happening was bad. But, I've heard people say
No,
COVID was the best thing that ever happened to them, you know?
exactly, exactly. And there's data, not from our lab, but people who just get a diagnosis of cancer or they have a heart
Hmm.
attack. These are big bads, you would think,
Hmm.
right? Um,
Right,
then,
right.
then they come alive. Well, most of us live
Mm,
sealed and unlived lives, and so all of a sudden
mm,
something says, "Wow, your days are numbered," and then you wake up. What I'm trying to do is to get people
right,
to wake up much earlier on.
right. Without having that kind of diagnosis. Yeah.
Yeah. There's even a positive way of understanding some of these negatives.
Of course. And also, it's also the timeline because I figured out that sometimes things look bad. But if you just
Exactly.
hold your horses a bit and you wait for the arc of the story to finish, you're like, well, actually, if I wait for the arc of the story to come around, oh, it's actually in my favor.
Yeah. Well, it's also the case that rather than wait, you create the outcome you want.
Mm,
So I
mm,
have this complicated to talk about, but easy to read in the Mindful Body discussion of decision making. And decision
mm,
making, people make decisions is when they're the most stressed. They just don't know what to do.
yes.
And we don't have time for me to go through it here, but the bottom line is don't worry about making the right decision. Just make the decision right. And so,
Right.
whatever the outcome is, there is a way to make it work for you. But if you
Mm,
assume this is the worst of all possible worlds, then you're not going to do anything with it. And then, it will do its evil. You'll be depressed and
right.
so on. So, I have lots and lots of studies with incredible findings where we're able to improve vision, lose weight. I mean, just, massive amount of exciting findings. And we can talk about them or not. People can read them in the Mindful Body. But the one thing that I came to in this 45 years of looking at all of this is the simple understanding that behavior makes sense from the actor's perspective, or else the actor wouldn't do it. Now, what does that mean?
Mm,
That means every time you do something, there's a good reason for it. But if you're not paying
mm,
attention to the good reason for it and you look back at it, you're only going to see it in a negative light. Let me give you an example. So I'm very gullible, probably more gullible than anyone you know. So you say to me, Ellen, look, please stop being so gullible. And I will try, but I'm going to always fail. And why is that? Because going forward, what I'm being is trusting. Okay.
mm,
The point here is that every single negative description of our behavior has an equally strong positive alternative. So you drive me crazy because you're
mm,
so inconsistent. That's because you're flexible. I drive you crazy because
Mm,
I'm so boring, and that's because I'm stable, and so on.
mm,
And so now you don't try to change yourself any longer. Once you recognize why you did it, but you want me, so you and I are close friends, and you're going to end our friendship unless I stop being gullible, for instance.
mhm,
Now that you realize what I'm being is trusting, do you want me to change? And I don't want myself to change because I value being trusting. So when you're trying to
mm,
change people's behavior, you have to change it from their perspective, not from your perspective. And this is monumental to me because what almost all of our grief comes from interpersonal failings, the
mm,
way, negative feelings about ourselves. And all of that goes by the by once you recognize that you did it because it was sensible, or else you wouldn't
mm,
have. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, today I'm going to be obnoxious, stubborn, and aggressive. All right. So when they're
mhm,
being these things, what is the reason for it?
mhm,
And then once we all feel better about ourselves, it's easier to have mindful interactions, right? Rather than worry
mm,
about being belittled by other people or giving the wrong answer and so on.
mhm.
And then we all end up healthier, not just happier.
Wow. So a lot of these tests are on the psychology and the a great effect on people's health.
Yes. Yeah. No, we have.
Yeah.
So a lot of the book is about, not all of it, but about mind body unity, which very simple,
Mm,
where people think there's a mind, there's a body, but if so, how do they talk to each other? Right? How do you get from
mhm,
a fuzzy thing called a thought to something material called? I said, this is silly. Put it back together. Now, when you see it's
mhm,
one thing, wherever you put one, you're putting the other. So we did lots of studies where we put the mind in unusual places and take the measurements
mhm,
from the body. For example, the
mm,
original one was called the counterclockwise study, where we retrofitted a retreat to 20 years ago and had elderly men live there as if they were their younger selves. So they spoke about past events as if they were just unfolding and so on. In just a
mhm.
week, their vision improved, their hearing improved, their memory, their strength, and they looked noticeably younger. That was done a long time ago.
Wow.
Now we have many, many more studies. I'll give you an example of, well, let's say we have people in a sleep lab. They wake up and we
Mhm,
fix the clock without them knowing. So they see they got 2 hours
mm,
more sleep than they got, 2 hours fewer,
mhm,
or the amount of sleep
mhm,
they actually got. Biological and cognitive function follow perceived amount of sleep. I have lots of clock studies. Let me tell you about one other, which is fun. So
mm.
we wound people. Not a big wound. I'm not a masochist and a sadist, rather. But it's a wound. And again, people individually
Mhm,
are in front of a clock. For a third of the people, the clock is going twice as fast as real time. For a third of the people,
mhm.
it's going half as fast as real time. For a third of the people, it's real time. The wound heals based on clock time, perceived time.
Wow. That is mind-blowing.
Yeah, and I have, I mean, the second study in the series was with chambermaids, where they don't realize that their work is exercise because they think exercise is what you do afterward. So we train
Mhm,
half of them. We just teach them your work is exercise. Making a bed is like working at this machine at the gym, and so on. So
mhm,
now we have two groups. Very simple. One group realizes their work is exercise. One group doesn't. They don't eat any differently. They're not working any harder than each other. Nevertheless, the group that now sees their work as exercise lost weight. There was a change in waist
mhm.
to hip ratio, body mass index, and their blood pressure came down. And the bottom line of
Amazing.
all of this, John, is that we have so much more control over our health and well being than people realize. And so part of my mission
Mm.
is to make people aware of all that they can be without all that
Wow.
effort or operation, surgery, and what have you.
What an amazing mission. So now the testing, that blows me away because I have thought of that myself. I thought, well, wait a minute. Just doing certain things is exercise, Sean, like
Right.
cleaning the house. I thought, well, that actually is exercise. You don't have to be at the gym to do exercise. It's movement.
But that's great, John. But the interesting thing is, if you don't realize it's exercise, it's not going to count.
Oh, well, that's good. I realize it.
That's right. Exactly.
I
Exactly.
figured that one out myself. Okay. And, I was walking through shops all day long yesterday and I thought, well, it
Right.
didn't work out, but we walked for a long time in the shops. That's exercise.
I see exercise as time away from the refrigerator.
There we go. That's all exercise. So I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated by the study where people were reliving, as if it's now and that they got younger. That's an idea for a business. You could have retreats where people, the fountain of youth
Yeah.
could be the fountain of youth retreats. That is actually a great business idea. Has anybody thought of running with that one?
Well, we've thought of it in many different versions of that. There are lots of potential business models hidden
Mm.
in the mindful body
Hmm.
because we start off with people getting most things wrong,
Mm.
seeing us all as limited in ways that we're not. One of the
Mm.
things that speaks to business, fatigue. People think, the body just gets tired when the body gets, no, fatigue is largely a psychological construct. So I asked
Hmm.
my students at Harvard, how far is it humanly possible to run? They're smart kids. They know a marathon is 26 miles. So they'll start 28, 30, becomes like an auction.
Mm.
Eventually someone says 50 and everybody groans. Then I turn
Hmm.
on a YouTube of the Tarahumara, which is a tribe in Copper Canyon, Mexico, who can run to over 200 miles without stopping. The difference
Wow.
between 26 or even 50 and 200, I don't think approximates the difference that I believe is possible between where we are and where we might go. And
Mm.
it just requires lots of reorienting. That if we go back to
Hmm.
fatigue in business, how do you make it so that people working for you are enjoying what they're doing, and then if they're mindful, they'll end up doing it better and produce better products.
Hmm.
We have lots of data for that. um,
Mm.
that at every turn, no matter what you're doing, you can do it mindfully or mindlessly, and the consequences
Mm.
of doing it one way or the other are enormous. And then
That
I
is, yeah.
think that for businesses in general to recognize that what they're constantly doing is using yesterday's solutions to solve today's problems. And once they
Mm.
become mindful, that clearly changes.
And yeah, because you could just be asking yourself, is there a better way of doing this?
Right,
Could
exactly.
I do this differently? So
Exactly.
it's thinking differently. Right.
Yeah.
That is mind blowing.
Yeah, no, and also part of that is recognizing that everything that is, everything, the size of your computer, the height of your chair, everything was at one point a decision. It didn't
Mm.
come down from the heavens. The heavens didn't say
Mm.
your chair should be this high with, okay.
Hmm.
And if it was a decision, it means that there was uncertainty. Because if there's no
Mm.
uncertainty, there's no reason to make a decision. That means
Right.
everything is mutable, everything can be different. And what
Mm.
happens is that when people make decisions in companies, they tend to then forget all of that uncertainty and act as
Hmm.
if whatever was decided was, going forward ad nauseum, infinitum,
Hmm.
should be kept in place. And so then, if you think you've got, the best way of doing things, then you don't pay any attention any longer,
Hmm.
and eventually you come up short.
Right. No, clients of mine, because I coach, they say, well, can I do this? And I say, you can do whatever you want.
Right,
And they're
right.
like, what? I can do it. You can do whatever you want. We just have to test it to see if it works. But you might have a better way of doing this, so you can do it. And then their minds are blown. They're like,
Yeah,
I can do whatever I want. You can do whatever you want. There's not like you have to do things my way because I don't know everything. I'm like, I don't know everything. I just know this worked for me and it works for
yeah.
most of my clients. But you might think there's something better. So let's try that. They're like, okay. I think we get to this thing where we're looking up to people that those people know everything. I certainly don't know everything. So when I say I don't know everything,
But it's not just that those of us who are experts don't know everything, that we
mhm,
don't know anything for sure.
right. We know you did your vast studies and we know you got certain results and you wrote a book about them. So you knew you got certain results that you are now reporting, or otherwise you wouldn't write the book, right?
No, true. Except people need to understand science only gives us probabilities. It doesn't
Yes.
give us absolutes. So
Right.
what that means is that there's always room to question.
Hmm.
And it means, I mean, people, I was talking to somebody the other, actually a little while ago before we started to speak, who was grieving, and she read some book where the person had said you should only grieve for, I don't remember what it is, but gave her an amount of time. I said, this is the
Hmm.
stupidest thing I ever heard. If you
Right.
had a relationship for 2 weeks with somebody, it's the grieving should be
Hmm.
different from a relationship where you've been together 30 years. It's 30 years where it's been a
Right.
wonderful relationship and an off, and so on. And so we need to
Hmm.
have more respect for our feelings. And it gets back to what we do makes sense for us, or else we wouldn't do it.
Right. But also, there's that thing of the expected time to feel miserable and have to. I also don't agree with that, because people that are
Right,
passing away, maybe they don't want us to spend years of our lives grieving them.
right,
And
right.
so I think of that. So my whole thing is, do what you're feeling with grief. If you're feeling grief, but
Exactly,
then there's not that idea we have to grieve because that's what people
exactly.
do for years and years.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
another problem. So I agree
yeah.
with you on that. I actually told my daughters that. I said, your grief period is according to what you are grieving.
Yeah, no, we
Yeah.
tend as a culture, and this is cultures across the world, to lock ourselves in to look for best practices,
Right.
the only thing that's sensible. So I had an
Yes.
experience when my uncle had died. We're at the funeral home, and I don't remember what I was saying to my cousin, and she started laughing. All of a sudden, she caught herself.
Mm-hmm.
She's at a funeral home. She shouldn't be laughing. I say,
Mm.
Sherry, the whole purpose of this is to comfort you.
Yes.
So I think that one title of my mindful body book that I had played with was Who Says So? And I think very often we
Mm.
would do well by going back to our 2, 3-year-old selves and say, Who says so? And when
Mm-hmm.
you realize that, yeah,
Right.
who said this? That it's supposed to be this way or that way, then you're freer to do it
Right.
yourself. And if you have women that you're coaching or speak to businesses where there are women, it's especially important for them to pay attention. So let me tell you, when I lecture,
Mm.
I often look in the audience and say, is there somebody very tall here? For reasons I don't know, there's
Mm-hmm.
always a 6'5" man. I invite him to the stage. Here he is, 6'5". Here I am at 5'3". We look silly.
Mm.
I ask him to put his hand up. I put my hand next to his. His hand is 3 inches larger. And I simply raise the question, should we do anything physical the same way? Now, the point of the
Mm.
story is that the more different you are from the person who wrote the rules, the more
Mm-hmm.
important it is for you to do it your own way.
Right. No, it is interesting about the question. I was watching this show the other day, and it was really funny because they were meeting in a restaurant for breakfast. And the woman, she goes, for breakfast? It was like a hookah lounge. Okay. The water types. And
Right.
the woman goes, she goes, breakfast, it's boring. She says, who decided all these eggs? Who decided? And I thought, that's right. And I thought that was
Okay.
really interesting. That fascinating. I thought,
Yeah,
she is right. Who decided what's for breakfast? She
exactly.
goes, all these eggs all the time. Who decided? And I just thought it was so funny, and it was true. It was like,
Yeah.
I thought, that's
Yeah.
right. Who decided we have to eat eggs for breakfast or cereal or whatever?
The bottom line here is to recognize again that everything is mutable. If it doesn't
Yes.
work, change it.
Right. Okay, that is amazing. Okay, Ellen, this has been a wonderful interview. What is one thing that you would like to leave the listeners with as far as a philosophy or a mind? I won't might say mindset because you're not set in your mind, but a mind growth. What's one idea?
Well, the idea is for people to recognize that whether it's that all of our problems, personal, interpersonal, professional, global, are the direct or indirect effect of our mindlessness. That means as
Mm,
soon as we break the seal on and no longer live sealed and unlived lives, we have an enormous world of possibilities open to us.
beautiful. And what a lovely thought to finish on. Ellen, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yes, me too. And listeners, please subscribe, please share, and we'll see you on the next one. You're listening to the Business Wealth Impact Podcast, your source for empowering information and cutting-edge ideas from the world's top minds. I'm your host, Jean Amlour, founder of seven-figure coaching company, Jean Amlour International. Join me on a journey to unleash your potential and create your highest success. Welcome to Business Wealth Impact.